Wake up. It's the Sleep Unplugged podcast, episode 165, Headache and Sleep. Got a painful, swelling brain. Welcome, everyone, to the Sleep Unplugged podcast. My name is Chris Winter. I'm a neurologist, sleep specialist, and your host for this episode of the podcast. If you're new to the Sleep Unplugged podcast family, welcome. If you're a veteran, welcome back. We're glad you're here. If you want to get in touch with the show, you can through our social media. That's Dr. Chris Winter Instagram, Dr. Chris Winter Twitter, X, Dr. Chris Winter Bluesky, Dr. Chris Winter Threads. We have a YouTube page where we post all the video content of our show. You can certainly post a comment to one of those multiple videos, and I will find it. In fact, this week's listener comment comes from YouTube. We also have a web page for the podcast. That's sleepunplugged.com. I have two books, The Sleep Solution, Why Your Sleep's Broken and How to Fix It, as well as The Rested Child, Why You're Tired, Wired, or Irritable Child May Have a Sleep Disorder and How to Help. I think that pretty much covers it. We comments, corrections, criticisms. We go to Serena, who posted a comment on YouTube about our episode on bedtime stories and wrote, "The Velveteen Rabbit, read by Glenda Cedarleaf on Insight Timer. While recovering from complex trauma that involved a deep fear of sleep," she wrote, the night was not safe for her. "I listened to it on repeat night after night. It soothed me like nothing else could." I appreciate you sharing that, Serena. I think the night can be a terrifying time for a lot of people. In fact, I think that's a great episode, podcast topic in general. Not so much insomnia and the fear that typically goes along with that, a fear of not sleeping, but rather a fear of the night, which is not something that is unique to young people. It can certainly be unique, a part of sleep pathology with older people too. And I appreciate you sharing that. Again, we talk about sleep stories as one of, to me, it's a depot, it's a stop along the way from difficulty sleeping to I have solved my sleep problem. I think a sleep story is a great stop along the way. And if that's where your train ends, that's fine. I think it's ideal if people can use sleep stories as a way to get things maybe under control and then build within them better structures, better understandings, better knowledge about sleep to kind of create a more bulletproof sleep where if you don't have access to the Velveteen Rabbit, what happens then? But I appreciate you listening to the podcast and taking the time to share a personal comment like that. Really appreciate it. For our musical guest or our musical topic this week, we always have a musical lyric in the topic, the title of our show, and then all the music we compile onto Spotify music playlists. We are on now Spotify music playlist volume 4. If you want to find those playlists, you can. The easiest thing to do is go to the Sleep Unplugged podcast webpage, go to Spotify music list. All 4 of the volumes are there. You can scan their code, find it on Spotify, save it to your own Spotify, and now you have that entire list to listen to whenever you like. This week, the title, "Got a Painful Swelling Brain," comes from a group I'm not entirely familiar with, nor really listen to a lot, but I think they're a really important group when it comes to music, and this is Devo. Devo, they actually took their name from sort of this social commentary belief in the 70s that we had reached our peak as humans and that we were now starting to devolve. I believe that was something related to I'm not an expert on this. There was some sort of writing or teaching in the 1920s, some anti-evolution pamphlet called Jocko Homo Heaven Bound. And that's also where they came up with the song Jocko Homo. So they felt like, humans are devolving, music is devolving, so they call themselves Devo. They're most well, when you think of Devo, it's hard not to think of Devo where they're not wearing their classic energy dome hat that's sort of, concentric spirals. It gets smaller and smaller as you go up. It looks like a sort of an inverted funnel that was apparently NASA inspired. And one of the best quotes that they had about the energy dome was that they claimed that the domes collected orgone energy from the human head and funneled it back into the body for vitality. And it worked really well as long as you didn't block the opening of the funnel, which they essentially were by sticking their head into it. So Devo worked on a lot of different levels. Their humor worked at a lot of different levels. So I think from a performance perspective, from an art perspective, they're kind of unraveled. I find some degree of their music unlistenable. To the SIB song that we're putting on this podcast, uh, the swelling itchy brain, it's sometimes abbreviated SIB, we will put on to the podcast here. One of my favorite Devo stories was that um, Neil Young in 1982 put together an experimental film called Human Highway, and Devo portrayed nuclear waste workers in this movie. And Mark Mothersbaugh in his full yellow hazmat suit, which works as a nuclear waste worker, but it's also sort of the Devo uniform, sings "Hey Hey My" with Neil Young at one point while wearing a surgical mask, but that's actually Devo singing that. And their big song, so this song that we're putting on the podcast this week, Swelling Itchy Brain, came off of their 1979 album Duty for the Future, which was their second album. I can't remember their first album. It was like Question, something about Devo, Answer, It's Devo, or something. I can't remember what that was. But their third album was really their big album. That was oh God, what was the name? It was Freedom of Choice, came out in 1980. It had Whip It, Freedom of Choice, and Girl You Want, which I think is an awesome song. Kind of always reminded me of a little bit of a Cars influence there. Um, but Whip It was never supposed to be a hit. It was sort of a parody of American sort of self-help slogans and things like that. And Warner Brothers only really released it as a single when radio DJs started playing it heavily, initially as a joke, but it just kind of caught on. The band was always shocked that this was their biggest single. And to date, this is their biggest album, biggest single was Freedom of Choice. And that was their third album. So we'll put Swelling Itchy Brain on the Spotify music playlist, and excited to feature Devo again. Not my favorite, but a very important group to talk about. So let's get into it. Headache and chronic pain. And I wrote down here, we have touched upon this a little bit. We talked about pain in sleep in episode 48. In terms of headache in sleep, never talked about it, but in episode 82, we did cover exploding head syndrome, which is a technically a form of headache. So we will not talk about exploding head syndrome. I did quickly look to see if there's any new compelling information about sleep and exploding head syndrome. I was not really able to find any, so we will move past that. So I think it's important, a theme of the podcast, if you listen to previous episodes, everything is bi-directional. I think sleep in general is a two-way street here, that absolutely sleep is going to influence headache, which I want to talk a lot about in this podcast. But certainly having chronic headache, having pain of any kind can definitely influence sleep in negative ways. So I think it's important to understand that these items go back and forth, and that when we look at actigraphy and sleep diary, sleep study information, lack of sleep, fragmented sleep, irregular timing of sleep, meaning you're a shift worker, definitely can be predictor of headache, in particular migraines in general. And the fragmentation and consistency seems to predict headaches more actually than total sleep time, which I think is really Fascinating. We again focus on sleep time, sleep time, sleep time so much that really sleep research in general is moving towards consistency and quality and scheduling, and sometimes even less about total amount. So 5 great hours of sleep that happen every night at the same time might not be nearly as bad as 6 to 7 hours of sleep that are fragmented and happen all over the place. I mean, look at sleep apnea. It's a fragmentation of sleep. Individuals sleep a lot, but their sleep quality is poor. It's very fragmented, and we know the health consequences that come from that. So when we think about the mechanism of headache with sleep, we tend to think about things like cortical hyperexcitability and migraine that can be worsened by REM sleep disruptions. We've talked about in that episode on sleep and pain, REM sleep in particular, when it is disturbed, fragmented, broken up, tends to lead to more pain in general, and headache is no exception. Sleep loss alters descending pain modulation pathways. So, pain is something we live with constantly. Pain is good. It's a warning to the body that something is wrong. When your hand is burning or it's getting pinched between two things, that pain is a warning that you need to change your state because the pain is telling you that you are damaging or something is wrong with your body. Where we get into pain being problematic is when we are having pain that is not typically serving as a warning. I always give the example I am sitting right now delivering this podcast, so I'm putting weight on my backside. For some people, that would be painful. Perhaps this is a painful situation to me. However, my brain and central nervous system is and peripheral nervous system is modulating that experience of putting my body weight on my rear end, and I am not perceiving it as being painful. So we have the ability to modulate pain. Think of pain as a volume. You can turn it up and turn it down. And we all know people who do something that one would think would be painful and they don't really perceive it as being painful, or somebody who might have something that's not particularly something we would think of as being painful but seems to be very painful to that person. We look at this a lot in athletes. Hey Chris, this player is recovering from their X injury and they're still struggling a lot with pain. As a neurologist, as a sleep specialist, what do you think's going on here? My first thought is always sleep. That when you have disturbed sleep, things that shouldn't be that painful are often perceived as being more painful. So it's not the athlete pretending to be in pain or not being a tough, you're not being tough enough. They're perceiving something that maybe other athletes with similar injuries wouldn't, maybe because their sleep, and in particular their REM sleep, is being disturbed. And this has a lot to do with a chemical CGRP, calcitonin gene related peptide, which if you're in the headache space, you probably know a lot about that because that is a important signaling chemical when it comes to headache in general, and often a target of some therapies, which we will talk about. So as we get into this, it's important to understand that I'm using the term headache as an umbrella, and that under that umbrella of headache are different types of headaches: migraine, cluster headache, hypnic headache, chronic daily headache, sleep apnea headache. You can have a headache after you've had a spinal tap. There's all different kinds of headaches. Sometimes I feel like we classify everything as being migraine when we talk about headaches, and they're not. Migraine is a type of headache. You can have a headache that has nothing to do with having a migraine. Sometimes I feel like we kind of blur that a little bit. It's sort of like somebody calling every dark colored soda Coke. No, soda is the umbrella. There is Coke, there is Pepsi, there is RC, there is Mr. Pibb, there's Dr. Pepper, or whatever. Um, is Mr. Pibb still around? For the record, here's a question I'll throw out to the audience. Mr. Pibb or Dr. Pepper? To me, I like them both. Love a good Dr. Pepper Jelly Belly jelly bean, but push comes to shove, Mr. Pibb was the better beverage to me than Dr. Pepper. Curious your thoughts. Even though you would think I would support my own and support the doctor. He's a doctor, I assume of something. I'm not sure what Dr. Pepper got his doctor. That'd be a great question. Where did that come from? And which came first? Was it Mr. Pibb? And then the other company said, we'll create a similar drink and we'll give him an advanced educational degree? Or was Dr. Pepper first? And the people who did Mr. Pibb thought, Dr. Pepper seems elitist. We're going to create our beverage and make him of the people. It's Mr. Pibb. He lives down the street from you. He sells auto insurance. He's one of us. You can have a beer with Mr. Pibb. Dr. Pepper, lives in the big house at the cul-de-sac, has the boat, not particularly friendly, always says he's going to invite you over for dinner, but never does. You know, the Peppers down the street. Um, anyway, I'm going to look into that. I'm going to get that answer for you. So let's start with one type of headache, and that is migraine. I could talk a long time about migraine and sleep. I think that there's a lot of natural connections here. I think number one, sleepiness and sleep is a big feature of migraine. Hey, Chris, I went through a period where I was not sleeping well. I had, projects due at work. I was traveling, and I saw an uptick in my migraines. For the record, I'm a neurologist. I do treat some headache as it pertains to sleep, but I am by no means a migraine or headache expert or specialist. I'm a sleep specialist. Sleep specialist by nature of what we're talking about today, we see a lot of headache. So I have a lot of experience with this, but there are actually people out there who have done fellowships in sleep, do sleep and headache research. I'm sorry, do fellowships in headache and do research in headache. In fact, when I sat for my neurology boards, just my general neurology boards, I shared a hotel because I did it in New Orleans. So I flew to New Orleans with a guy who was a sleep fellow. So I was the Chapel Hill UNC sleep fellow. This other guy was the headache fellow at Chapel Hill UNC. So we shared a room. Great guy, but the guy snored like crazy. The night before the biggest exam of my life, I actually ended up sleeping in a bathtub in the hotel room so I could close the door. I made a little bed in the bathtub, slept there before my neurology board exam. Little trivia there. So I'm not going to name that guy, but you could do some detective work. Hey, who was the headache fellow when Chris was the sleep fellow in Chapel Hill from the year 2003 to 2004? And you can figure it out. So I'm not going to name names, but had I not passed that board exam, I had this whole grievance that I was going to file with the board to see if I could get my money back. Anyway, it all worked out. So sleepiness is a big part of migraine, meaning that when you don't sleep well, you're more likely to have migraine. I think poor sleep quality and sleepiness can be a heralding sign of a migraine. I get migraines periodically. I have had migraines with aura from time to time. They're very rare. I do not really treat migraines. As I've gotten away from medical training and school in general, my headaches have gotten much better again because I think stress and disturbed sleep were a risk factor and a promoter of the headache that I just don't have really in my life to that extent anymore. So I'm sort of proving the point, right? But I do get headaches from time to time. Sometimes prior to getting a migraine, I just feel a little off, a little tired, maybe a little irritable. And I've come to recognize that in myself. I get a little quiet. And my wife will even say things like, are you getting a headache? You just seem a little quiet, a little still, a little off. And I'm like, as I take stock of myself, I'm like, yeah, I think I am. I definitely think I'm getting a headache because I definitely don't feel right. For kids in particular, but for adults as well too. But I think in general for kids, sleepiness can not only be a feature of the headache, but I think sleep can be a treatment. I remember when my daughter, Maeve, who produces the podcast, was in middle school, she was really struggling with migraines with auras, etc. And for her, it was sleep it off, which worked really well. So, for kids, sleep can even be a treatment for migraines as we think about this. So, REM sleep and sleep quality, there have been meta-analyses that show reduced REM sleep and poor sleep quality in migraineurs versus people who were controlled. This was a song article from 2023 in the Journal of Headache Pain. So really looking at that quality of sleep. So if you gave me 100 sleep studies, we put 100 people into a sleep lab and we evaluated the quality of their REM sleep, we could probably do a pretty good job of figuring out who are the potential migraineurs and who are the people who are not. And I think that this really represents this idea of, and we'll talk about it later again in terms of treatments, what do we do with people who are chronically getting migraines? The frequency is high. Maybe they're not responding to particularly well to medication. I think sleep studies with particular attention to REM sleep can be really helpful. There is massive insomnia comorbidity in migraine patients. And again, there's that bidirectional relationship. Are you having migraines because you're not sleeping well? Or are you not sleeping well because you have migraines? Um, when you look at people with struggles with insomnia, they often refer to having a migraine disorder and insomnia as sort of a double hit. And CBTI can reduce both. It's CBTI, CBTM, right? Chronic behavioral therapy for insomnia, chronic behavioral therapy for migraine. So when you work on the CBTI for these patients, yes, their sleep gets better, but their migraines get better. So they feel better, less migraine days, less taking 4 hour naps in the middle of the day to get rid of the migraine. Now you've woken up after your 4 hour nap. Of course, it's going to be hard to fall asleep. So you can imagine how these two conditions of migraine and pain and insomnia could really work to build each other up. And when you go after insomnia, you could really see how it could really work to minimize both disorders. And there was a great article about both in headache medication or in the journal Headache in 2018, really looking at how CBTI can dramatically reduce the number of headache days. And a lot of times when you look at migraine and headache research, it's measured in either migraine or headache days, or what I like, migraine or headache free days. I think that's a really powerful metric. Coming into the study, 200, I'm making this up, 218, headache, migraine patients. They typically are averaging in a week 1.3 headache free days. And after the therapy, after the CBTI, that's jumped up to 5.5 headache free days. Like that is a really meaningful thing, not only to me, but to patients. Imagine this week having 5 days free of headache instead of one. Extremely meaningful. When we talk about narcolepsy, we often talk about cataplexy free days. So I think this is a wonderful way to take something research oriented and clinical and make it really, really meaningful. When we look at pharmacological treatments of migraine, one of the ones that pops up is melatonin, 3 milligrams nightly. It was a randomized controlled trial published in 2016 that showed that it was had a similar efficacy in terms of preventing migraine that amitriptyline did, which is a tricyclic antidepressant. It's an old drug that a lot of people use as first line treatment for migraine. I can tell you from firsthand experience, very helpful to patients. This was the drug in a very small dose that radically changed Maeve's headache situation when she was dealing with them as a young person. So very effective drug for some people, and could be a really, so looking at melatonin, particularly in people who have migraine and sleep disorders, could be something that's very helpful. We talked about the, recent just a minute ago about calcitonin gene related peptide CGRP. CGRPs are now first line preventative agents per the 2024 American Headache Society statement. And there have been multiple reports showing that individuals who utilize these treatments for headache show that their sleep quality improves, which further drops their headache frequency as well too. So I found those things to be really interesting. Cluster headache is a headache type that is not migraine. These individuals often have, as the title would describe, clusters of headaches during periods of time, and then the clusters tend to go away. Rarely, these things can you can have crossover between cluster and migraine, but they're kind of a disorder in of themselves. These attacks typically peak between 9 o'clock and 3 o'clock. So we always think about the individual who's like, I was doing fine. Then every night I've been waking up with this terrible headache that's usually gone by the time they wake up in the morning. So the ICHD-3 basic criteria is generally the age is over 50, typically occurs. I'm sorry, I'm talking about hypnic headache. Sorry. These individuals happen at all age. In fact, do you remember there was a running back for the Broncos during the John Elway era? I want to say Terrell Owens. It seems wrong. Anyway, this guy was instrumental in the Broncos finally breaking through and winning a couple of Super Bowls. I'll figure out what his name is. Terrell Owens sounds wrong. Terrell. Anyway, he was a running back who really struggled with cluster headache. He would often go to the locker room and breathe, pure oxygen through a tank when he was feeling these clusters come on. Obviously, he was getting them not so much in the middle of the night. There has been a study that shows that melatonin can blunt these nocturnal cluster headaches in some patients. Small studies showed that 10 milligrams of melatonin may help in episodes of cluster headache. Hypnic headache are alarm clock headaches that typically wake people from sleep. This is the criteria. The criteria for hypnic headache is generally an individual over the age of 50, and these happen during sleep, 15 or more times per night. Treatment with caffeine at bedtime can be very helpful. They can be very disruptive to sleep. Indomethacin can be very helpful for these individuals, lithium, and even studies about melatonin. So hypnic headaches often pop up in sleep literature because they almost exclusively happen during sleep. Hypnic, hypno, sleep, etc. So something to kind of think about. Chronic daily headaches, tension headaches, are very common. They are not migraines, often begin in the back of the neck with stress, kind of work their way up. They can transform into migraines, but can be their own headache form all by themselves. Sleep disturbances dramatically predict and perpetuate these chronic headaches and tension headaches. And there was a study and a great paper about that by Baldacci in Frontiers of Neurology back in 2020, really looking at that relationship between sleep and chronic headache. So if you're in a headache clinic, sleep is a big part of those things. I get a headache every day, and I have for years. That is very atypical for migraine. Migraines, by definition, are paroxysmal. They come and they go. And so when you start getting into the chronic daily headache, which can be very difficult because they're often being exacerbated by and perpetuated by the medications we're using to treat headache, really looking at other things outside of the norm, like sleep, can be very helpful for breaking the cycle in these patients. Addressing insomnia that these patients often have with CBTI, or combining with CBTP, which is chronic behavioral therapy for pain, often yields massive benefits in both of these domains. Secondary headaches, I think, are really important. And the biggest one I want to talk about here is sleep apnea. Chris, I have sleep apnea. What am I likely to see? We've talked about excessive sleepiness, loud snoring, choking and waking yourself up during the night, really tired the next day. Sleep is a big one, and headache is a big one. So headaches are very common with these individuals. They often wake up with headaches because they weren't breathing really well. Yes, they're not taking in oxygen. They're also not getting rid of CO2, which can perpetuate the headache. So really looking for these individuals. Morning headaches happen in about 25 to 30% of sleep apnea patients, according to a study done in 2024. CPAP therapy dramatically reduces intensity of these headaches. It's one of my favorite things to hear. Chris, since I've been wearing the CPAP, two surprising things. I don't wake up to go to the bathroom. So sleep apnea and enuresis, sleep apnea and nocturnal frequency are a big one. Hey, Chris, since I started wearing the CPAP, I don't wake up with a headache anymore. Right, because that breathing disturbance that's perpetuating and facilitating that headache has now gone away. So the ICHD-3 defines sleep apnea headache as less than 4 hours, a headache that happens less than 4 hours after you wake up. Bilateral, got a pressing quality. So if you're waking up with headaches a lot, and you happen to snore, or even if you don't snore, talk to your doctor about, hey, I've got these headaches. They're not really responding to things. They're getting worse. Could I have a sleep study to make sure I'm not harboring a breathing disturbance like sleep apnea that could be causing this? I wanted to highlight an abstract I saw in Seattle. It was abstract 0552 that was basically about post-traumatic headaches and sleep. Basically said in veterans and active duty service members with mild traumatic brain injury, there was a related post-traumatic headache in a lot of these patients that prazosin significantly reduced, but it also reduced their sleep disturbance that often went along with it. Lower insomnia severity scale and lower impact of the headache as per headache impact testing. So the takeaway was treating insomnia pharmacologically in these post-traumatic headache patients could often make not only a big difference in their insomnia, but also a big difference in terms of their headache. And this is very important for people in that military post-concussive care to be aware of. So, bottom line with sleep and headache, if you get headaches, have you explored sleep? Do you snore? Does your headache seem to happen when you first wake up in the morning? Is it more of a nighttime hypnic cluster pattern? Does the headache wake you from sleep? Is there an associated insomnia that goes along with your headache? And if you have any sort of post-traumatic episode related to the headache or the insomnia, is this something that your doctors are putting together and linking and using that to guide treatment? So that's it. This is headache and insomnia. Tell us your headache stories. Are you dealing with headache and sleep problems? If so, what was the thing that made the biggest difference for you? Dr. Chris Winter, Instagram, Dr. Chris Winter, Twitter. You can find us on YouTube. Check out our Spotify music playlist. We'll put Devo on there. And that's it. Until next week, sleep well.